This episode was originally a live conversation which took place at Founders Tap in April 2024.
Imagine millions of normal people represented at the annual shareholder meeting of ABB, of Tesla, of UBS.
Yeah.
I think certain decisions and certain trade-offs would be discussed in a very different way. I think that's what the impact is. And I'm not even saying, they would be more pro-clean tech and less this, but simply it would be much more, not even representative of society at large, but it would be representative of what the owners of these companies think.
Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. If you enjoy listening to our show, make sure to follow the podcast and leave a rating. And now, here's your host, Ansuya.
Well, welcome everyone. As Mira introduced, I am, not working in the sense, more volunteering at Swisspreneur, yes, in my free time. So for those of you who do not know, Swisspreneur is a not-for-profit organization. It's been around for, I think, 7-8 years. We have the biggest, most popular entrepreneurship podcast in Switzerland, mostly in English. We have over, I think now, probably close to 400 episodes from all kinds of startup founders, investors, lots of interesting conversations, most of which was done by Tillmann. And I've also joined now since last year. And we also have a syndicate where we help raise funds for early stage startup founders, so you can check that out as well. We have a community on Slack where people can interact with each other, so you can apply to get in. And we do events, so we do like cruise networking events on the Lake of Zurich in the fall that's coming up, also in Lausanne, and networking dinners as well, which we club it up with conferences, so you can find that all out on our website. And today, let's get into the conversation. So before we do that, I want to let everyone know that the mics are being recorded, so we'll use this as an episode on Swisspreneur. And also your interesting Q&As will be recorded as well, so that everyone's aware. Usually the more interesting questions come from the audience, so we'll try to keep my questions short and then handing it over to you, probably approximately 30 minutes of our conversation, and then 15 to 20 minutes questions from you, and then feel free to approach Tillmann, and I'm guessing you'll be around if you have any further questions. All right, so let's get into it. As everyone knows, Tillmann, you're the CEO and co-founder of Inyova Impact Investing, which is a platform like you help people achieve their financial goals by aligning 100% to their values and lifestyle choices. So we'll get more into that, like how you do that. But first of all, what I would like to know is, a lot of people, they don't know that, their choice of bank, for example, might mean that they're helping to fuel climate change or abuse human rights. There's a lot of things. That's going to be the topic for today as well. So what is the connection between our financial system and this from your point of view, first of all?
That's a very interesting question because it's so big,
yes.
Right? So I think the first important point is to realize that there is a connection. We tend to use it as the way we talk about the financial system is, that it's a system out there, or it's an industry by itself next to the other industries, when in reality, it's a system or an industry that is entangled with everything we do. It impacts and is impacted by everything we do. It's a big facilitator, but not only greasing the economy, but also actively steering the economy in a certain sense. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just that realization is a first big step. And then if you ask the question, what is the connection? Well, there are many ways. I think the first connection that most people have is when you actually have a bank account. You put money into that account, the bank uses that money for something. Yeah. Maybe not one-to-one, but it influences their balance sheet, their capital ratios. The bank ultimately makes money by giving out loans, by also offering services and these kind of things. But so your money has an impact on what the bank does, and the bank may, and we've had very prominent examples for that recently in Switzerland, bank may use that to finance things that you don't want to happen, right? Because one of the big other impacts of the financial system is that it brings money to certain places and stuff happens there. And if you look at the history of technological innovation or innovation in general, stuff tends to happen where the money is and only where the money is. So for especially technological progress only happens where the money is. So if we look at the world right now, how we produce energy and cars and how we travel and how we eat, all of that was influenced by capital allocation decisions in the past, right? Because we at some point chose to invest in railways, we chose to invest in highways and streets, we chose to invest in centralized power systems and all these kind of things as a society. And banks are one of the main actors. So the money that you put into your bank is used by the bank, and it could be used, to finance a new oil drilling platform or a human rights violation in the Amazon or something like that. And it's very difficult to even, understand what that is, let alone steer it.
So, one of the anecdotes I want to bring out is also in the news regarding UBS. They invested like $3.3 billion in 7 companies that were producing nuclear weapons or their components. Similarly, there's so many other examples. Like, how can banks do better?
That's another very big question with many answers. Banks can obviously do better in many, many ways. You don't even have to talk about sustainability to do that, right? They can just simply become more customer-centric. And banks are a very special kind of business. It's the only business model out there where you actually make money on the active and the passive side of the balance sheet, right? Yeah. So I take money from you and you pay me for that. And then I do something else with that money and I also get a return on that. So that's not true in any other industry it's a very special kind of business model. Mm-hmm. And then it also comes with this societal effect, that if a bank gets large enough, there's a big risk in it failing, so it gets protected. That's the too big to fail thing. So there are many things, of course, that banks can and should do better in general, being more customer-centric. In terms of sustainability, the step number 1 is transparency. It may not ultimately, there are many sustainability, let's talk about sustainability, is not black and white. Let's maybe not talk about nuclear weapons, but weapons in general. Some people think, there should not be weapons. Other people think, okay, maybe we need a certain level of weapons, be it for the police woman here in Zurich or be it for national security. It's okay that we have different opinions, and as a society, we need to come up with some form of decision-making process. But so the first step is for banks, for example, to have more transparency on what they finance and what they don't finance. And when you think about sustainability, one of the big problems that we have right now is that the initial efforts in being more sustainable were mostly PR rather than, actual transparency. Yeah. So one of the very concrete things, most of the large banks, their sustainability was always, from an organizational perspective, located in the communications department, as with any banking finance, the star being the Deutsche Bank, where the corporate sustainability officer is the former head of communications. Yeah, that's not a coincidence.
So, today's topic, which is about, how to leverage capitalism and save the planet, big topic. So I have just another big question, because, of course, like when we talk about capitalism, you're building things to benefit certain segments of society. If we talk about nuclear weapons, it could be beneficial for protection in certain cases and so on. In certain cases, it's not beneficial. That can be morality in general, I guess, can be argued for so many topics. But what is your view that has the economic system that we see currently today been a good steward for our planet? I want to start with that, and then I'll drill down into more specific questions. Yeah.
Your question is, has the economic system that we have been a good steward for the planet? Mm-hmm. I don't think you cannot give credit to the system, and you cannot blame the system. Mm-hmm. It's not a problem of capitalism or another system. I would say, capitalism surely is the best system I know, and yet it has brought us to where we are. And I think there's a lot of agreement in society today that the current way we run the planet is not working out for much longer, right? So there needs to be a lot of change. But I don't think abolishing capitalism is the solution, because I don't think capitalism itself is the problem. Capitalism is simply it's a value and moral agnostic system, right? It just its strength is its efficiency in allocating resources and making sure that a lot of humans can interact in a certain way and be productive in a certain way. But let me give an example. There was a time where in capitalism, we as humans had not commonly agreed that child labor is a bad thing. So all the children were working. And at some point we realized, okay, the free market doesn't solve every problem. So apparently we don't want our children to work. We even think, capitalism can be better if we give children time to be educated. So let's abolish child labor and, have some societal redistribution of money to finance education. And at that point in time, the system got made better. Yeah. And I think that has always happened. That's just one of the many instances. I mean, we always treat this question like, will the market fix it or not? Yeah. Of course, the market does not know what we care about as humans, and that's for us to figure out. And then we have to somehow make sure we work that into the system. But I think capitalism in itself is capable of really bringing the force in the best, or making humans very, very productive, and that it has shown over the centuries that we've just lived through.
I mean, so many critics of capitalism, right, will point out to the following, like the issue that it is driven by the profit motive, and it's possible to make profit while, doing some kind of harm. And often doing good seems to be at odds, with making profit. So can we, in your opinion, reconcile the two, that we can do good and we can also make profit?
I think it's a myth that they always have to be at odds. I mean, of course, there are many examples where they are at odds, but then, many, like the reason why we have access to social welfare, ultimately there is a lot of for-profit behavior and thinking into it. The reason why we have a variety of drinks and healthy nutrition, all these kind of things, they're also connected to a lot of for-profit thoughts. That's another big question. I think it's not that easy. It's a myth that, they cannot be reconciled. There are many examples where there obviously, certain for-profit ideas are in contrast with doing good, but there are also other examples, and I think Inyova is one of them, where they're very well aligned. And the other reason why that is a complicated question is, what is good? It may be good for you, but bad for me, or maybe good for all of us here in Zurich, but bad for people in another part of the planet. It may be good for us as we live right now, but bad for the generations to come. So, it's a very tricky question to answer.
So let's get into how Inyova does it, to better understand also how you evaluate companies. So first of all, how do you measure impact, for example? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, let's start with the holy grail. So impact measurement is the holy grail of impact investing. You can't. So ultimately, you cannot measure impact, at least not in the scientific sense that you put an exact number in it. The reason why that is that impact is not an accounting figure. Impact is ein Wirkmechanismus. It's a cause and effect kind of mechanism. So you can do two things. First of all, you can empirically validate whether there is a cause and effect causation, right? So that's the first thing you can do. And second of all, you can estimate whether it's big or small. But what you cannot do is you cannot say, I as an investor, I have saved this amount of tons. That's one of the good examples where a lot of financial players, do a lot of communications that is not very, very, very sincere. Mm-hmm. The reason why that is so difficult is, if you think about the ultimate, let's stick with the topic of climate change. Yeah. That's easy because we can think about emissions and everybody understands that. So let's say I invest in a company, that company reduces its emissions, and I have contributed to that because I've financed a project that helped them reduce emissions, and I've also, as a shareholder, executed my ownership rights and I've exerted pressure. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, regulation has done something. The consumers have demanded different things. The employees might have worked in a different way. So there are all these separate pressures, and it's very difficult to say, out of those 100 megatons of CO2 saved, you get credit for 2 and I get credit for 3 and the regulators get credit for 10. It's impossible. We can't do that. So what we can do is we can make sure that we work with mechanisms that are empirically proven, and that already is something that is not happening a lot. Yeah. But that's the first thing that we need to do. And the second thing is we can assign orders of magnitude that, again, can be empirically validated. Sorry, this was now a very technical answer.
No, so I mean, it does help. And from like your user's perspective, like what does it look like? How simple is it for them, to understand this?
Yeah, let me maybe start by explaining what we actually do,
Yeah.
just to make sure I'm not sure everybody knows. So in Inyova, we're an impact investment firm. So what we do is we allow everybody to build wealth while making the world a better place, right? So you can invest money with a very clear for-profit idea. You want to make more money. This is the money you invest for your retirement, your pension, the house you want to build at some point, whatever it is. But it's about growing your wealth, but at the same time, making the world a better place. Yeah? And that can be the environment, that can be social things. Inyova stands for invest in your values, because we actually let you decide what you care about most, whether that's the climate crisis or biodiversity or human rights, equality, these kind of things. So the way that works is you invest money, and then we have different products. Let me maybe explain one to share some light. You invest money into a stock portfolio. If you are a shareholder of a company, the shareholders of the company actually are the ultimate owners and the ultimate controllers of what the company does, how it interacts with the world, what it produces, how it treats its employees, its customers, its suppliers, all of the stakeholders, right? Because you assign the board. So one of the, coming back to your first questions, the impacts of the financial system is the shareholders actually control the companies. Now, 100 years ago in capitalism, that was taking place. But it's not taking place anymore. The owners of the company have left the room where these discussions are taking place. So nowadays, if you go to a shareholder meeting, typically you have 3 or 4% of the shares present. So last week, we were present at the shareholder meeting of Zurich Insurance and of Swiss Re, for example. And typically there you have, who you have present are representatives of large hedge funds, for example. So you have a very small minority of the people that actually vote, because everybody else has left the room. And why is that? Because we all invest passively, we invest in ETFs, because all these funds don't execute their ownership rights. So we actually bring our investors back to the table, because one of the problems that we currently have with capitalism is what is called short-termism. We have a very short-term focus, so corporate management often is incentivized to look only at the next couple of quarters and not the next couple of decades for the company. And that is an ultimate, like a consequence of the fact that you have minority shareholders, which also have, very short-term incentives. They then figure out with the management what they want to do. And we bring this long-term perspective again to the table, because we actually represent tens of thousands of Swiss shareholders, all of which, still want to be around in 20 to 30 years, and which want the Swiss economy and their companies and their investments to thrive. And we enable them to have so we influence these companies, right? We analyze what are the risks, what should be going on, and we bring this voice to the table.
And how do then in what capacity, or like what do you see with the shareholders? How often do they participate, and how many of them do in such meetings?
So they don't go to the meetings, we go to the meetings for them. So the way it works is if you are a customer of Inyova, you have a stock portfolio, you're co-owner of typically 35 to 40 companies, and then if we engage, for example, now currently we work a lot with insurance firms, we let you know in the app, we tell you what is going on, and then you can say, I support this, I don't want to support this. You can also more or less give us a blank check where you say, I want to support, I delegate my votes to you, but also in single decision level, you can say, I want to support this, but not this. And then we talk to the management. We do that before, so we address them. So for example, what we did with Zurich Insurance, we told them, look, we think it's a major risk in your strategy that you keep insuring new fossil fuel projects. You shouldn't be insuring those anymore. It's bad business. It's bad for shareholder value. We're representing 5,000 of your shareholders. And then we start a discussion with them, and we analyze these risks. And in the case of Zurich Insurance, they actually stopped doing this. They announced it 2 weeks ago. Wow. So this is how we do. But like our customers, if you invest with Inyova, you don't have to spend your day in a sweaty gym listening to a lot of corporate talk. We do that for you.
I mean, that's definitely novel. Like I haven't personally, from whatever tools that I use, seen this kind of an offering. What do you think would be the wider impact if more and more financial institutions start working this way?
I mean, imagine millions of normal people represented at the annual shareholder meeting of ABB, of Tesla, of UBS.
Yeah.
I think certain decisions and certain trade-offs would be discussed in a very different way. I think that's what the impact is. And I'm not even saying, they would be more pro-clean tech and less this, but simply it would be much more, not even representative of society at large, but it would be representative of what the owners of these companies think. The thing is, another thing we keep forgetting about the system, we are all owners of these companies. You all have money invested somehow, right? In your pension fund, in your insurances, in your 3A and whatnot. All this money, a lot of this money is maybe initially be invested at cash at the bank, but ultimately you may be invested in any kind of through whether that's a pension fund or something else in these companies that make up our economy in Switzerland, in Europe, in the world. So you are a co-owner of these companies already, even if you don't consciously invest your money. But your say in what should happen, whether, for example, as a society, whether we should care about global warming or not, is not represented.
And how do you choose these companies in the first place?
We do a lot of analysis. So we look at, we're a tech company, right? So everything I'm talking about is largely automated, except the discussions with the firms, they actually take place so we have humans do that. But so we analyze these firms, we look at a lot of data, public data, data we procure from specialized data providers. We have our own research. And so we pre-filter stock-listed companies. We have a universe of roughly 400 that we find investable, both from financial side and from sustainability side. And how the analysis works is very dependent on the topic. So for the climate crisis, it's a very different analysis than, let's say, for gender equality.
The reason why I'm also asking is because, as you mentioned, there isn't really like a set way of measuring impact or sustainability like in companies in general, right? So do you kind of gather, of course, you look at their reports and everything that they present, but then are you also looking at other kinds of data, like public opinions about the company? What is the sentiment in the news about these companies? Possibly, information that they haven't divulged in the reports that they produce?
No, like when we look about, we only invest in companies where we think, we invest people's life savings, right? So we only invest in companies where we feel that they will also financially thrive. And some of them may already be very green. And the other ones are companies where we think we can get them there. They will get there. They can be a part of the future. They can, thrive still in the future. We wouldn't invest in Shell, for example. We don't see a business model for them. And we also don't see we don't see them transforming themselves into it. When analyzing a company, we don't look, at public sentiment. We just look at all these prospects. But let's say sentiment is in some industries, it can be a risk. So for example, one of the engagements that we did last year was with advertising firms. So if you remember around the global climate talks, there was a lot of lobbying going on by fossil fuel industries and even states. And a lot of that was done by European advertisement companies. And that resulted in a giant backlash. And in advertising, your key resource is creative talent. You want to, you basically are dependent on young creative people working for you. And we feel it's more difficult, especially the younger generation, being very sensitive towards sustainability topics. You may ruin your employer brand by taking on these kind of engagements. Yeah. And we engage publicists. They made a tiny % of their revenue with that, but had a big risk in that. So that's where we thought about sentiment. But it's not like, we don't take on our decisions based on popularity or anything. There's very stringent analysis.
Okay.
Maybe I want to add a comment on impact, just to make sure hopefully wasn't misunderstood in the beginning. So it's very important to be very stringent and quantitative about impact. A good analogy is if you think about ice cream, right? If I eat a big bucket of ice cream right now, it's impossible for me to say, I can quite surely say this has an effect on my body weight, on my body in general, right? And that can be empirically validated very, very thoroughly. But what I cannot do is I cannot say, it will increase my body weight by 200 grams. That I cannot do. And the same is true with this kind of impact. I can say it has an effect, definitely. It has a small effect, strong effect. It has an effect if these other 10 factors also play in, but I cannot put an exact number on it. So the fact that I'm saying it's impossible to measure impact doesn't mean that it should not be very stringently assessed. It needs to be, and that's something that is definitely missing.
And I mean, there are changes happening also in the legislation. Like, how can this support make these things facilitated easier?
In many ways. So, for example, by requiring that it happens in the first place, but also by clarifying. One of the things about sustainability, let us compare it with accounting, right? So we have very clear laws about how you run your accounts. You know, you're being audited as a firm, but the accounting procedures, we've refined them over hundreds of years. Now we're coming up with this new concept of carbon accounting. You know, companies should disclose their emissions and what they do about it. But we don't have a couple hundred years to come up with that, and it's a very, very complicated topic, right? It has all these. It's super difficult to figure out. So one of the things the state can do is just help clarify things for what companies can do, also what it means for consumers with labels. And I actually think Switzerland is doing a pretty good job compared to, let's say, our big all-around neighbor with the European Union, where regulation is actually producing a lot of confusion. Switzerland actually has understood, like, some of the European regulation is in straight contrast to what the science says, whereas the policymakers in Bern seem to have read the papers and understand the science. So, for example, here you have, one of the things is that ESG by itself will no longer qualify as sustainability, because regulators understand that an ESG assessment is ultimately just a risk assessment, because sustainability risk is financial risk. And policymakers understand that in Switzerland.
It's interesting because, like, when you say Switzerland does that well, and then we read the news about developed countries, right? They have very strict laws and regulations when it comes to how they want to monitor climate and all of these sustainability topics. But a lot of the work that they do, if we talk manufacturing, whatever we talk, is happening in the developing countries, where firstly, neither these regulations or legislations are applying or exist, and a lot of the business that they're doing is coming from those countries. So their impact may not be felt so much in the country, like here in the home country, but is felt in the developing countries. So one of my questions would be that, how do we ensure that there is this sort of globally equitable, if we talk about climate change, like climate regeneration that is happening everywhere? Yeah.
I mean, that is one of the big problems, that it's a global problem.
Yeah.
You need global action to solve it. Nobody has an incentive to act first, right? But it's also a good example for how you're talking about offshore emissions.
Yeah.
Why do we just let somebody else emit all those greenhouse gases? It's not happening in Switzerland. One of the things that you can do, and that certain political parties in Switzerland have been advocating for years, is that you apply the same rule to imports as you do to things being produced here, right? So, for example, you cannot say this happened outside of Switzerland, so I don't care about it. I think we already have that for certain human rights questions, for example. That's one of the things where you say, okay, offshoring doesn't solve the problem. You're still responsible for those emissions that are in your upstream or downstream value chain.
Not sure how to set up contracts for your globally distributed team? Wondering how to best keep your seed round investors up to date? Join our growing community on Slack and tap into the hive mind of over 600 Swiss startup founders. Click the link in the show notes to apply to join today.
So that was it with the questions that I had. I will like to open it up to the audience for questions from their side. Thank you very much for answering my big and also complicated questions. But now for the audience, yes.
Thank you so much for the wonderful questions and presentation, and also getting an insight into the inner workings of Inyova. And congrats on the work that you do and the belief. I had a question regarding more the users, actually, for service. So as an individual, I take my finances or my investments quite personally, yet until they grow bigger, I guess. But I wanted to ask, what level of control do you give to your users to choose the companies that they would like to invest in, sustainability or not?
So we have we take sustainability serious in the sense that there are certain things you cannot invest in with Inyova, right? So an oil drilling company, it's just out of the question for us because we don't see a long-term prospect for it. And we're always very long-term focused in our investment theory. But within the realm of what we do, we actually have a high level of control. So Inyova stands for invest in your values. You can actually personalize it up to the single stock level. You don't have to. We have a large chunk of customers, that says, I'll just trust you. I don't want to do this. But we also have customers that blacklist 100 companies, right? And say, oh, no, this company not, and I don't trust them, and they fired my uncle, and their food tastes bad or whatnot. So we have these kind of customers that personalize a lot. So both is possible. You can, if you're a fan of Elon Musk, you can say, I definitely want Tesla in my portfolio. And if you're not a fan, you can also say, I definitely don't want Tesla in my portfolio. So you can do that, but you can also delegate it to us. You always have full transparency. So when you create it, you can try it out on our website. You can create a strategy. You immediately see each individual company in your portfolio. We tell you why it's in, what its impact is, also what the controversies are. Every company there's no company without, question marks behind it. And we make sure it's financially sound.
So same congratulations.
Thank you.
My question is, maybe I didn't get it, but what is the relation between somebody opening a portfolio with you and this representing people for specific causes? Does that happen automatically, or are those two separate things?
So first of all, how the mechanism works, when you invest with us, we create a portfolio for you of stocks that's personalized, as we just discussed. When you transfer money, we buy the stocks for you. They're in an account under your name, but you are the owner of these stocks. So ultimately, if it's an ABB stock, then you are a co-owner of ABB. What we then do is we do work where we analyze ABB's strategy and we think, there's a risk here, or they're doing that there, or this is something we should voice with them. And then we ask all the ABB shareholders among our customers, or we inform them about what's going on. And then you can opt in or you can opt out. But it's important to understand it's your vote, right? So this is not our impact. So even if we go there, we're just representing basically you.
Hey, thank you for the cool podcast so far. When you were asked about what could banks do better, you said they could be more transparent, and that's what my question is about. You mentioned that you're doing analysis, and I'm interested in the conflict as a tech company, that your analysis and the algorithms and the AI that's involved, that's your capital, right? And that's your competitive advantage to your competitors. But also you want to be transparent, right? So if I tell you, hey, I want to invest in sustainability and that's super important for me, and you're saying, okay, this company or this investment has a sustainability score from 9 out of 10, I would like to know how exactly did you come to that number, and I would like to know how you are encountering this problem.
So your problem being whether transparency is at odds with keeping a competitive advantage? Is that your question? Or?
Essentially in your analysis, right? In your analysis, there's a lot of knowledge on your side.
Yeah.
And if you're giving that open source, basically, then everyone can do what you're doing, right?
I'm not sure. So first of all, we do publish our methods. So you can find white papers on our website where we do publish our methods. Let me maybe try to answer this with a story. So when I studied mathematics, and when I was writing my thesis, I was working on optimization problems, right? So mathematical algorithms for optimal control problems. And there were a lot of the best algorithms were published, right? But then if you wanted to use them, you still had to code them, and you had to code them efficiently, and to get them to a good result, to get them to work is very, very difficult, even if you understand how it works. So you can, if you want to share a method in the sense of understanding how it works, so somebody can, convince themselves whether they're on board with the basic principles and the premises and all that, you can publish it. Making it work is still very difficult. You can see the same thing in machine learning today, or even in AGI today. You can publish many, many models, but ultimately the value comes from setting it up in a system and being able to train it at scale. And that's a lot of skill that, even if you have the knowledge, it's not as easy as, just typing it up. So that's the first thing I would say. And then secondly, I would say, I think one of our competitive advantages is that we're able, to update this and ship an improvement every other week. right? So even if you're able to copy where we are right now, we'll be ahead of you again next month, because we have very deep understanding. We have tens of thousands of customers already who work with this. We understand what works, we understand what doesn't. Our sustainability analysis now is way different from what it was 4 years ago, because we've learned so much. So just this progress, this agility is also very, very difficult to copy. And I think I could come up with 5 more things like that.
So can I ask another question? Is it like open source what you're doing, or is it just the white papers?
It's the white papers. No, we don't open source the code. That we don't do now.
And how do I know then that what you're doing in your code is actually following the white paper? Is that just trust, or?
Yes, that's trust.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we could have ourselves audited, but so far that nobody has ever asked that question now.
Okay. Thank you very much.
So you mentioned that you check the companies that you are investing in. Is all the data that you are using for this check publicly available, or is something that you also have access on a private with each of the companies that you're investing in?
It's both. So we use a lot of public data. So that can be self-reported data, what they write about themselves in their press statements and their annual reports. It can also be what the press writes about them or what NGOs write about them. That's often very, very interesting public reports. And then it's also private data. So it's research we do ourselves. It's discussions that we have with experts. And it's also, for example, we procure a lot of data from specialized data firms. You have, for example, companies assessing data companies that only assess another company's climate impact or gender equality impact and these kind of things. So we have a variety of these sources.
Okay. One very small question is more for me to understand if I got it right. Can you compare yourself with a set of ETFs on specific verticals that you give just more control to your stakeholders?
Yes, you could. That? So basically, you could think about
it's just to compare with something
yes.
something that's not.
No, you could say that it's like a personalized ETF just for you, for your financial profile, for your values, for your impact topics that you care about. But financially, it acts like an ETF. You have the same kind of return and risk expectation as you would have for an ETF. The other thing that is different to an ETF, you are actually the co-owner of these companies. Sorry, the owner of these stocks, so we can do this active ownership work.
Because you give the stocks that are on the name of the customer.
Exactly. Okay. Like with an ETF, you actually own a share in a fund, which is another financial vehicle. Here, we are cutting out all these middle layers.
And another one. What's the minimum investment? Just
2,000 Swiss francs.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
Thank you. I have a question regarding equality and also maybe a bit about the title of this podcast, because it becomes increasingly clear that I think the crisis we are facing, at least in my bubble, it's less about saving the planet, but more of a question of equality. So it seems where the capital is most dense, it's the part of the people that are least affected by climate change. And now I would ask again, how do we leverage the capitalism to save this problem if the people where the capital density is the highest suffer the least from solving this problem, or can profit the least from solving this problem?
Another big question with many answers. So you say that where the money is where the problem is felt least, right? Because we're not affected, or at least not quickest. I'm not sure I have the golden answer to that question. I mean, what comes to mind immediately is internalizing some of these costs. I mean, we talked about markets before. Ultimately, climate crisis is a market failure, right? Like what we're doing right now is we're living in a certain way. You're going on vacation, you're flying to one of these places affected first for vacation, and you pay 1,000 francs for a plane ticket, but the real cost is higher because you're not paying for those emissions. But somebody will, and the people in that place are paying for it already today, but also your kids and my kids will pay for it in the future. So that's a market failure. It's an externality. So one of the things is internalizing it by putting a cost on carbon. That's the thing that comes immediately to mind. But I think apart from that, there's no brief answer to this question.
Thank you for the interesting conversation. My question is about the business model and cost structure. Because we talk about impact, and I think you have the most users or customers you have, I don't know how you call them, the most impact you have. But also when someone is thinking about investing money is also not only looking at in what they're investing in, but also how much it costs them. So can you talk about the cost structure, the business model, like how much it costs to...
Yes. So so let me start with the cost is for the service, it's a percentage of how much you invest, and it's between 0.6% and 1.2%. Depending on how much you invest. If you start with 2,000 francs, it's 1.2%. That's all inclusive. That's the only thing you pay. There's no, like in an ETF, you would have product costs. You still need to pay Swissquote to buy it for you and to hold it for you. All of those things are included. That is basically our revenue, right? And that is the cost you have as a customer. If you're talking about our business model, well, the revenue is that. It's the 0.6 to 1.2%. And then, I mean, our cost is basically our team. It's a team of technology, so engineers mainly, and investment managers and sustainability analysts. Those are the three main teams that we have. And then we do have to pay, like for example, we pay for data and we pay for the trading, we pay for the accounts, everything. We don't charge that back to you, but that's some of our cost. So that's roughly how we make money. So for an individual, if you invest money with us, you need to invest roughly 4,000 or 5,000 francs. So we can actually cover the cost we incur from serving you. So most of our customers are actually very, very profitable, right? We have very good what is called unit profitability. But then it's a classical tech business model. We have, given that our main cost block is the team, we have a minimum size we need to serve in order to become profitable as a company, and it scales brilliantly after that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, the question was also about how do you remain competitive in comparison to other ways people can invest their money in that are not impact related, sustainability.
How do we compete with that, or how do we remain competitive? So, I mean, currently our positioning is we're addressing what we call dark green customers, right? So there's a huge niche of I think many of you are thinking about founding or have already found it. It's very important to think about your strategic positioning. What is the ideal customer profile that you're serving? So for Inyova, we are focused on people that prioritize sustainability at least at the same level as cost and returns. So they do care about returns, and if we don't deliver good financial returns, they'll leave. They do care about costs. If we price ourselves out of the markets, they will not come. But the sustainability is just as important. So think about people, that buy vegan food or bioproducts and are willing, to pay for this too. So that is our positioning. The only other players in the market serving the segments are non-digital firms. In Switzerland, it's Alternative Bank Schweiz. In Europe, it's Triodos Bank or GLS Bank. So this is a big market. Like these banks, especially Triodos, they're huge and they're growing strongly, but there's no digital players serving them. Then within that market, you have niches, for example, microfinance, and you have players like here in Zurich, Blue Orchard saving them or Responsibility serving them. But that's not diversified, so none of you can use that for their retirement savings unless you are already a millionaire, so you can put a little money into that. So we are positioning ourselves to a niche where they really care about our value proposition. They really care about the service of impact. And that's why they're also willing to pay a little bit more than if they, went to a neo-broker, such as Neon here in Switzerland, where they could set up an ETF savings plan for free. Which, by the way, the cost, you would pay less, but it's not huge. But they're willing to pay this a little bit more because they care about the sustainability.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, really, really cool talk. I guess my question is about the returns that you generate. Do you see that impact actually drives returns, and particularly with the way you interact with your customers, where customers can choose, I don't want to invest in oil and gas, or I don't want to invest in this and that they actually end up screening out anything that can generate returns, at least in the medium term. Do you already see an impact on your returns from the impact that people choose?
So there's two answers to that. So actually three. Let me start with the quick one. There's no analysis on let's take the example with Zurich Insurance I mentioned before. We engaged them. They now committed to not insure fossil fuel projects anymore. It's too early to tell whether that is increasing their shareholder value in the long run, and even if it does, it will be difficult to scientifically prove that, whether if they've doubled in 2 years, whether it was because of that. So that we don't know. What I can tell you, and again, that's not now, it's also an Inyova experience, but there's many, many scientific studies on that. The question on whether or not sustainability comes at the expense of returns, that's done in academia. Like with a sustainable investment portfolio, you can have the same or better return as with a conventional portfolio. And there are many, many answers to why that is the fact. But in academia, this question is done. What you cannot prove yet is that it systematically outperforms. That we don't know yet. I think ultimately it very much depends on the market cycle that you're in. And for that, I can give you a very concrete example from our case. So we've outperformed the market. So we've delivered better performance than you would if you invested in an ETF over the last 5 or 6 years. But the same is not true over the past 2 years, right? So in the past 2 years, if you were not exposed to oil and gas, and if you were not exposed to weapon makers, and we are not exposed to those industries, it was very difficult to be in line with the market. And then especially if you then look at the United States, 60% of the returns were driven by just 7 companies, right? So the big tech firms that you know, mostly Nvidia, for example. But if you were not invested in Amazon, and if you were not invested in Meta, even if you were invested in oil and gas and in weapons in the United States, it was very difficult to beat the market. So in the past 2 years, we were slightly below the market. In the long run, we've outperformed the market. And I mean, it's still to see where we are in 20 or 30 years, but what the science shows is that you can be very much in line with the market or better. So that's the first part of the answer. What I can tell you for us, we've designed it, and Ansunia asked me before, about whether doing good and profit is at odds. One of the reasons why people enjoy Inyova is that we're very good emotionalizing investing, right? We take, like, maybe some of the things I've described, they sound difficult and technical, but when you do it in the app, it's very lighthearted and fun. And we take you on this journey. This is what we're doing with the company. You actually see these companies in your portfolio. You use the products of the companies you invest in. All of this becomes very meaningful and real. It's not, this cold ETF that you don't really understand. It's not this financial system out there. This is real life that you're investing in. And that's how we're designing it into an experience in the app. So for us, that works, because we can really see that the customers that interact with these kind of things, they invest more, they refer us more. So this part of impact generation, it's not only something that we do because it's at the purpose of the company, it's not only the reason why we founded the company, but it also helps grow the company because it brings in more customers. And if you're an investor with us, you will tell your friends over dinner about what you've read in the app. And if you're sitting in the train and you see the wind turbine and it says Vestas, you will tell your friends that are with you in the train, I'm actually a co-owner of this firm and this is what I just learned about them. And these kind of effects, they really help us grow. That's part of the product.
But what about individuals actually making a lot of the investment decisions, right? You can build your own portfolio, your own criteria. I'm not someone who knows anything about finance, very little. I might choose the wrong things. I mean, that's why you choose an investment broker, right?
No, you can't break it. So what you can do is you can say, I care about these topics, and you can say, I do want these firms or not those firms. But we will always make sure the overall portfolio makes sense. And by making sense, I mean is that the risk is well managed and your return expectation is Pareto optimal. So what you cannot do is you cannot come to us and tell us, I want these 35 companies. You can say, I don't want, for example, we propose a portfolio to you, and then you tell us, please remove these 5, and then we may add another 5, right? But we will always make sure that the portfolio is diversified. You cannot break it.
You kind of interesting segue into my question. You talked about the portfolio returns last 2 years being not as good as what they were, which is known. So 2 elements. One, greenwashing. How real is it, and how much you visualize it staying in the future as well. Second, maybe not a complete scan, but we do have some role models in the corporate world who have stepped back on their role into sustainability. Unilever is one I can think of. Poster child sustainability, but the new CEO has come in and said, we have gone too far ahead, being purpose-driven and sustainability-driven. So do you see more trends towards that corporate will say, actually, we are overdoing it and maybe step back more and more, or do you see the activism staying strong over there?
Sorry, what was your? Let me start with this. I forgot the
greenwashing
first question.
And
greenwashing.
Do you think it has not died out, the focus on sustainability, but it's tapering off?
Okay, I mean, the first question is easy to answer. Greenwashing is very real, and it's a very real problem. And it comes in a huge variety of forms, from companies and people stating things just because they don't know better, but it's actually not true, to misleading, to leaving out facts, to blatant lying. I mean, again, we talked about Deutsche Bank being the star of every financial scandal. I mean, they've had their fourth rate, I think, about greenwashing this year, because they keep claiming they're doing this and this, and they just don't do it. So there are a variety of forms. You see that in every industry. So greenwashing is a big problem, right? And there are many things we need to get right about greenwashing. One of the reasons why, the best antidote against greenwashing is transparency, right? Even if we just publish the thing, and even if all of our customers don't read it, if we get large enough, NGOs will, and we will get caught out for wrongdoing. So transparency is one of the biggest antidotes against greenwashing. The second question was, companies stepping back on their sustainability claims, and is it something that is on their focus? So I think overall as a society, I'll talk about society and then I'll talk about companies, there's a certain level of sustainability fatigue right now, right? One part of it is that in the last 2 years, all of a sudden we've had more urgent problems, right? We have war in Europe. So for many people in my bubble, that changed their stance on weapons, including me. So all of a sudden, and then it became very existential. So we have, in our offices in Germany, our German colleagues 1.5 years ago were worried about whether they could heat their apartments in winter. I mean, that is something that never happened in my lifetime, right? That you would worry about that in Germany. So other topics began to get focused and maybe seem more urgent than the climate crisis. That is one thing, and I think. Another effect is that a lot of people are simply disillusioned from greenwashing. So they're just, if somebody says we're doing something green, consumers just say, yeah, whatever, I don't believe you. And the third part is that in some cases, let's simplify it by saying the sustainability industry or sustainability companies may have become a bit too paternalistic, right? It's become very, you all know what flight shaming is, and basically telling consumers, if you don't buy from us, you're a bad person, or if you don't do this, you're a bad person. And I think consumers accepted that for a while, but they don't accept it as much anymore, and there's a certain reactance to that. And all these problems exist, but at the same time, I don't think there's the problem or the desire for more sustainability and more counteraction has gone away. That's at least not at all what we experience. I mentioned before we focus dark green consumers. Even throughout the last 2 years, this customer segment has grown intensively. The people have become much more smart and knowledgeable about sustainability. The problems are not going away. There's actually opportunity in some of these trends. So if we're able to explain why we consider ourselves greenwashing safe, then people come to us when they don't come to others anymore. So I don't think it's not a trend that is dying out because today we had sun and snow, and all of us were wearing shorts and sunglasses last Sunday. Today we had snow. We see these effects, right? And they may be more dire in other parts of the world, but even in Zurich we see them. So these problems are not going away. I don't think this drive and regulation and by consumers is changing in the long run. So that was the societal answer. With companies, a lot of companies were just very quick when it was a big marketing gain and everybody was expected to make big claims to do that. And now all of a sudden realize, oh wow, it's actually not that easy to become, climate compliant. And now all of a sudden we also understood that what we thought net zero was may actually not be net zero because, all these claims by companies were based on buying loads and loads of offsets where we now realized they're actually not saving anything. So we've just started understanding that, it's like somebody saying, I'll run a marathon next year without thinking through what that means and without having a training plan. And now I come up with a training plan and I realize, holy moly, this is a lot of work and it will cost a lot of money and I have to change a lot of things. So while it's painful to see that happening, I think it's an important step that we go through as an economy to realize what it will take to figure this out, because otherwise it's not getting solved. So it's also something that I think, it may seem disheartening at first, but when we look back on things in 10 to 20 years, I think we'll describe this phase as the phase where we started getting real about the problem.
Yes, hello. I have a question. Did you try any kind of B2B offering towards banks or something like that?
Did we try a B2B offering? Yes. We actually have a B2B partnership. We have 2 B2B partnerships. So we work with Microbank, so one of the largest retail banks in Switzerland. They actually launched an impact investing offering that where we are the partner. We do the asset management. We provide all the content. So if you go to Microbank and you do impact investing, that comes from Inyova. You can read that there. It's also transparent. And we run an impact index for Vontobel, which is another large bank. But those are, I mean, we love those 2 partnerships, and especially Migros for us, as sustainability people. Migros is, I think, probably one of the biggest or the best names you can find in Switzerland when it comes to really thinking long term. It's a great partner for us, but our passion is in B2C. Our purpose is we want to turn millions of people into impact investors. Before doing this, I was with McKinsey, right? So I was working for big corporates, and we didn't want to build a business. And for us, we wanted to build something for the masses, for many people, and to work with them directly. So that is very much in our DNA and our passion. That's why we don't, B2B is a great business to be in, and there's a business case for us in that too. But we're focusing on our B2C case. Yeah.
All right, so that was it. Okay, last question then.
Yeah, just a quick one on what's the earliest stage investment you go into, or do you only invest in companies that are post-IPO? For example, like a Climeworks, for example? Or?
Yes, no, so we have 2 solutions. We have one solution that's called Inyova Invest, and pretty much everything I've talked about today is that, and that's post-IPO. That only works with publicly listed companies, right? So no early stage. And then we have another solution that is quite new that is called Inyova Grow, which is an interest solution, fixed income solution. And there we also invest in projects such as wind parks, such as agri-farming, such as energy efficiency, battery storage, these kind of things. But there it's not firms, it's individual projects.
Thank you.
But what we don't have is venture, like Climeworks. I would love to invest in Climeworks, but we can't.
All right, so that was it for today's session. Big round of applause for Tillmann.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, you can support us by rating our show on Apple Podcasts. This way, we can reach an ever-growing number of aspiring entrepreneurs.